And today marks the 1 year mark since the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police officers, sparking nationwide protests and larger conversations about race in America. President Biden demanded last month that Congress deliver him a major police reform bill by today, but that looks unlikely. So joining us now is Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota. Senator, thank you so much for being here, especially on this day. I gotta ask, where does the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2020 stand right now in this moment?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be with you. I just spoke with my colleague, Senator Cory Booker, about an hour and a half or so ago, and the negotiations are continuing, and this is a really, really good thing. I think that the president did exactly the right thing by putting out there a goal and a deadline for moving these negotiations forward, and that created the urgency that we need and the momentum that we need. We're not there yet, but the most important thing is not getting it done by a certain time, but getting legislation that is truly going to have an impact on the lack of accountability that we have in policing. And I'm confident and feel really positive that we're going to be able to get some good things done to have better transparency, better accountability, and to be able to really have a difference that people will be able to see in their communities.
Senator, we know obviously the Republicans have introduced their own bill, and the sticking point really seems to be around universal immunity for police officers. Can you speak to that, particular element, where the negotiations stand on that right now, and maybe even why this is such an important point for Democrats?
Well, you're right. This is an issue that is really important, I think, to get the kind of accountability that we need. Right now, law enforcement, police officers have something that's called qualified immunity, which is which basically it makes it virtually impossible to hold an individual police officer accountable if they violate somebody's constitutional rights, somebody's civil rights. So many of us think that that needs to change, that is one of the things, not the only thing, but one of the things that needs to change so that we can have more accountability. In addition, one of the things that I want to see happen in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, I'm an original co-sponsor of that legislation, is to look at an improved, tougher national standard for use of force. Right now, all that has to be proven is that a police officer used reasonable force, and I think that that fuels some of the issues that we have with escalating a crisis rather than de-escalating, which is what we need to do. So those are two things that I think are important. And I will tell you that I think that they're working hard. Senator Scott on the Republican side and Senator Booker on the Democratic side, and also Representative Bass in the House are working very hard to try to find a resolution. I know that the George Floyd family are just leaving the White House and are going to be coming over to meet with Senate leaders a little bit later this afternoon. And I know that they will be making the case that the time for action is now, that we cannot let this moment waste. It's been 1 year since the loss of Mr. Floyd, and we need to use this momentum to get real change, systemic change.
Sticking with that, the time being now and this idea that universal immunity is part of what's holding things back here. Do you think in your conversations with Republican counterparts that there is some room to budge here to reach an agreement?
I believe that there is room to find some common ground here. I mean, I want to be clear, I'm not involved in the nitty-gritty of these negotiations, yes, but I understand that there's lots of really good conversation happening there. And so that is what we need. We need to have real systemic change. And I want to just say also that there's been a lot of discussion about how we need to support the efforts of local law enforcement to really make the innovative change that they need to make. And one of the things I hope we also include in this legislation, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, is support for local departments that want to, for example, advance new innovations in de-escalation, that want to change the way law enforcement handles traffic stops so that they don't escalate into a shooting. These are the kinds of things I think we should be supporting at the federal level.
We know the White House has obviously played a big role in pushing for this bill. I wonder, how do you see that as a benefit or a hindrance to the effort right now?
Oh, I think it's making a very important difference. It's keeping the pressure on. On Sunday, late afternoon and evening, I was home in Minneapolis and I attended a commemoration of the death of Mr. Floyd, and really a recommitment to this movement for justice, not only in policing, but also in all of the ways that systemic racism holds people of color, Black people, brown people back from equity in housing and education and healthcare. The fact that the president speaks about this, that the Vice President Harris talks about this and is pushing to get the kind of systemic change we need, I think makes a huge difference. It's changing the conversation, and we need to not only change the conversation, but also get action.
You know, as you noted there just a second ago, it has been 1 year since the death of George Floyd. Over the course of this past year, I just wonder, from your own perspective, what has been the biggest positive difference that we've seen across the country and maybe even in your own state?
Well, my state, my beloved Minnesota, has some of the worst disparities in home ownership and education and healthcare between Black people and Native people of any place in the country. I think that with this tragic murder that was captured on video, that nobody could look away from, that there has been a shift in the understanding amongst white people about what the experiences of Black people when they interact with the police. And I also think that George Floyd's murder has galvanized a civil rights movement in this country and really around the world like we haven't seen since the 1960s. And that movement has a lot of power, and we need to keep it going to get the change that we need.
Senator, thank you so much for being here and talking to us again on this particular day, on this particular topic, one that is very important to the entire country. Thank you, Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota.